Thank you again for having me this evening. As I said earlier, I'm a mental health advocate and disability campaigner. So a bit of background about me. At the age of 3 years old, I was diagnosed with a pilocytic astrocytoma, or as I like to call him, Timmy the Tumour, because it's a lot easier to remember and to say. And that is a benign brain tumor. And this came after we just moved from Zimbabwe to Bournemouth, and we were bounced around from Bournemouth Hospital to Poole Hospital and then to Southampton, where I was later diagnosed and treated. And since then, I've had multiple surgeries to remove the brain tumor at 3 years old, 6 years old, and again in my first year at university. So when I was a kid, I was often believed that the medical model was the only way of looking at disability. So some of what I'll be talking about is kind of that medicalized model of how I internalized that and like internalized ableism on myself because of how the world saw me as a disabled person, and kind of towards the end I'll look at my own experiences of how I now see myself. And as a kid, I used to think that I was a burden, I was a problem, and that I believed what the doctors were saying. Like they'd sit at the end of my bed and they'd talk about me, but not to me, or they'd talk to my mum and my dad and not really address me as a young person or child who was still in a vulnerable position that wanted to have a voice. Um, and that felt really overwhelming. And even at school, I was bullied. And I know it's wrong to have favorite nicknames that you get from bullies, but one of mine was Tumor Boy, and it sounds a bit like a superhero character that was like thought about, and then they threw it into like the trash can because it wasn't gonna work or sell enough copies of the magazine or whatever. Um, and that at the time really kind of defined who I was as a person, because I believed that I was my tumor and that's all that I was. I didn't have the ability to be Chandy, who enjoyed going out and doing sports or going out and enjoyed playing music and stuff like that. And so I was really defined by my disability, but in a negative way that I saw it. Um, and as I went through kind of school and into college, that continued. And then in my first year at university, I was kind of independent. I was living on my own in halls, and I started to experiment and be more confident with myself and try and see who I wanted to be, making new friends. But the way I would do this was I'd use my student overdraft to buy Domino's pizza and then sit in the bar and offer it out and say, like, come and have a chat with me, because I thought that I wasn't interesting enough to have friends or to have a conversation organically. And I then kind of kept having these conversations, building up better networks and stuff, to a point when at the end of towards the middle end of my first year, I started to have signs and symptoms that my tumor had come back, and I kind of was telling people I know something's wrong. I need to get this sorted. Like I can feel my body's unwell, and they were like, "No, you just need to do a bit of yoga or stop going out as much." And don't get me wrong. When you're at university, you want to be engaged with everyone. You want to go out to the bar every night. You want to be there. Otherwise, you're not going to be popular, or you're not going to be like seen enough by people that you want to be friends with. And so I kind of pushed that aside and just thought, no, you're wrong. Like I know what's wrong with my body. And fast forward a couple of months, I was at Southampton General having an MRI and being diagnosed, and then having a surgery again. And that kind of period of like 6 months just went so quickly. And during that time, I was still trying to complete my first year at university. And I failed some of the modules. And in order to get into my second year, I had to pass all of the modules by a like, certain mark. I think it was like 40%, but they wouldn't let me have any special circumstances because of my illness. And so I had to reset the essays like the week after coming out of brain surgery. And that didn't go to plan, because obviously trying to write a 2,000 word essay when you just had brain surgery is not ideal. And I failed it again. And my tutor, who'd been supporting me for the year, basically sent an email out saying that I shouldn't be allowed to go back because I'm going to fail my degree with or without the support they can offer, based upon his assumptions of working with another student who'd also had a disability. And that kind of was the moment when I realized that, like, actually, it's not my disability that defines me. I'm more than just my disability. It's a massive part of who I am. And I subscribe to the identity first model, like I'm a disabled person. And that's because I kind of learned about the social model of disability and how empowering it can be, because it shifts the responsibility away from me as a person to society also having a responsibility to change to help me be independent and be a person. Because yes, I need medicine and surgeries to still be here today, but it's not all of my existence. It's not everything that makes me disabled. And I started to learn more about this in my degree in social work, and I felt really empowered and stuff. And so when I graduated with my third class degree that felt like a first class, um, I then struggled to find work, which was another barrier that a lot of disabled people face because of the employment gap and because of things like the fact I don't drive and I have mental health problems that mean that working a full day is not realistic for me. I have to take a break middle of the day. I can't work a full week. And employers don't like that, especially when you're trained to be a social worker. And so I then, just before the pandemic, started talking about my lived experience to university students, and that continued into the pandemic, but just online. And since then, I've kind of branched out to working with different schools, colleges, universities, around the kind of social model of disability and educating around the language that we use, how we talk about disability. I use my own social media platforms to highlight how we can all be better at championing change, but also understanding that we're not meant to be perfect. So I'm quite open about the fact that I can be ableist, I can be discriminatory towards myself, but also other people, um, whether that's unintentionally or not. But it's about learning and about working with people and finding what it is they need to help them be the best version of themselves. Because as a kid, I was brought up by parents who were from Zimbabwe and from Africa, and they were very passionate about there's no such thing as can't. And I'm still a firm believer in that. But I think it's with the right support. And without that support, the can't becomes a reality. So I'm very vocal about that and about how our community is so amazing and so full of life because everyone has so many different experiences and it's not clinical like you see in the movies or like that inspiration at like of overcoming everything all the time because we have so much to give and so much empowerment that we can provide to other people because of our lived experience and how we form innovation and stuff. I always like to talk about like how texting came from innovation to help people communicate who can use the telephone and same with emails and stuff and Siri. And these are all things I talk about now. I recently, in the last couple of years, started doing podcasting. So I work with the Brain Tumor Charity on their podcast and talk about kind of life with a brain tumor and how the team at the charity impacts change and policy, both in Parliament in the UK and in Scotland, and also in Wales. And then also I have my own podcast called Dude, Where's My Ramp, which is with my friend Emma in America. And we talk about the differences of being two disabled people, Emma, who's a wheelchair user, and myself, who uses a walking stick and has other mobility problems, and how different it is in both countries and our frustrations with things, and talk about things that also we want to kind of educate ourselves on. I also am writing a book at the moment called Rights Up Front, where I'm interviewing 50 people who've got disabilities. I recently interviewed Bionic Barbie from the Barbie movie. She was also in Wicked, and interviewing other comedians and other activists who've got disabilities and who are disabled, to kind of talk about that. How did they come to understand disability? How do they embrace it? Like, and things like that, to really show that disability is not just one idea that people have from like TV, film, and media, and from politics. It's multi-dimensional and intersects with everything. I think I've just waffled there for about 10, 12 minutes. I do apologize. But yeah, any questions?